Welcome back, everyone, to the Jake Broe Show. I'm your host, Jake Broe, and today we're joined by fellow YouTuber Johnny FD. I believe he's over about 250,000 subscribers right now. He's an American living in the city of Kyiv. Johnny, we've never actually spoken to each other before, but we have a lot of mutual friends. I've seen in your videos you spending time with F.I.R.E, Brandon Mitchell, Roman, maybe even Operator Starsky. For those who don't know you, can you please introduce yourself to the audience?
Yeah, I'm an American who's been living in Kyiv for the last, let's say, 3 or 4 years off and on. But actually, I've been traveling for the last 10 years. And about 6 years ago, I started coming here just as a tourist every summer. And I decided to make my home here. So now I'm a resident. I bought this apartment that I'm living in. So Ukraine has become my home since.
So before the war started, I was actually a finance YouTuber. So when I found out that you describe yourself as a digital nomad and part of the F.I.R.E movement, financially independent, retired early, I have to start there. That's fascinating to me. How long have you, or let's go back. When did you become involved in the F.I.R.E movement, and when did you decide that retiring as early as possible was your goal?
Yeah, so for anyone who's not familiar with the term, FIRE stands for Financial Dependence, Retire Early. And it's a big community of people who try to live as frugally as possible, save up as much money as possible, and be able to retire before they're 55 or 65 or whatever the normal Western retirement age is. For me, actually, I fell into it accidentally. And actually, as a side note, before people start asking in the comments why my eye looks wonky, but I've been volunteering at a dog shelter the last couple of weeks, and I got a bit of an infection from one of them, but it's healing now, which is good. But in 2008, I left my corporate job in the US. I moved to Thailand, first for scuba diving and Muay Thai. And to be honest, I was just trying to get away from my old life and who I was becoming living in LA, which, wasn't really who I wanted to be in life. And I was like, let me start over. Let me move to Thailand, where I can rediscover myself. And very happily, I worked as a dive instructor or dive guide and an aspiring Muay Thai fighter for about 5 years. But when my body started feeling the age of, either fighting every day or training every day or being underwater every day, I decided I needed to find some other way of earning an income. And that's when I started working online as a, quote unquote, digital nomad. And somehow that brought me into the F.I.R.E movement.
So I just want to quick ask your age if I can. I was born in 1984. When were you born?
3 years you're younger. You're
so
older.
81. So we are pretty similar in age.
Yeah. And actually, I was gonna say I was surprised too when I found your channel and I started going back to the earlier videos, finding out that you were it was a finance channel before Ukraine. And it's funny that even though I'm living in Ukraine, I was watching your videos as an update to kind of have a third perspective that wasn't so close to the conflict. Sometimes it's a bit hard when you're in the middle of things to see something from a kind of a top level view. And I guess as surprising as that would be, when I met Kazakh Gundi, who was a British Marine that was captured in the Mariupol Azovstal plant, he told me that he was watching my videos from Kyiv while he was literally in the trenches and in Azovstal. So it's kind of crazy how we're all watching each other's videos from wherever we are.
On that note, I've talked to F.I.R.E and we've compared kind of like our analytics, and a majority of my audience are actually Europeans, but a majority of his audience are actually Americans. So there's more Americans interested in Europeans' perspective, more Europeans interested in Americans' perspective. So it's funny how it doesn't matter who you watch. This has been my attitude this entire war. I am not in competition with any other YouTuber because everyone has a different perspective, everyone has a different voice, everyone's contributing and adding value. So people who don't want to watch me, that's fine. Continue supporting Ukraine. Watch whoever you want to watch that you feel gives you the most value for your time.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And, I'm glad we're all on the same side, and that, whatever, internal bickering that may come about sometimes, that gets squashed, and we remember, we're all on the side of Ukraine, and the only real enemy is Vladimir Putin and his army that he sends to Ukraine.
So I just have to get your life story because I think it's fascinating.
Okay.
You went to Thailand in 2008. You then committed to becoming a digital nomad, and you were working online towards your F.I.R.E goal?
Yeah. So
when did you officially to say I'm financially capable of being retired?
Okay. So I remember the kind of beginning of it. It was 2013. I was in Chiang Mai at a Muay Thai camp. I just had my, I think, 6th pro fight. I broke my leg from it, or I fractured some bones, so I couldn't train. I couldn't fight. I was running out of money. I think I was down to my last $1,000, and I thought, okay, what can I do? I had a blog. I decided, okay, let me try to monetize it somehow. I ended up writing an ebook. It's called 12 Weeks in Thailand: The Good Life on the Cheap, all about scuba diving and living cheaply, while kind of pursuing your hobbies in Thailand. And from there, I, got into other types of businesses. I ended up selling spa furniture online. Mostly, ironically, it was all made in the U.S. in Oregon and San Diego. Most of my customers were actually in Hawaii because I guess there's a lot of spas there. But I was doing all from Thailand. I sold that business, started another one, and I remember, I think it was 2020 when it was during COVID. I was in Sri Lanka, and I realized, you know what? I don't need to work anymore. Why am I getting up every day to grind? Let me try to do something more positive with my life than just start another business to try to get a bigger number in the bank account. So that's when we realized, you know what? I think I'm financially free. I've hit what they call lean F.I.R.E, which is the bare minimum you need to just live a simple life. And I decided I'm done. I'm only going to do things I love doing from now on.
So, first of all, just to clarify what you were describing before, that's called drop shipping, right?
Yes, but I try not to use that term because people confuse it with selling cheap stuff from AliExpress.
Yeah,
that got
Alibaba.
Popular. Yeah. I was really annoyed with that because the kind of method I learned, you actually sell legitimate products, you really build a brand, and you're selling things that actually have good reputation. Actually, I don't think I've ever disclosed my niche, but it's been 10 years now. But the brand I was an authorized dealer for is called Earthlight, and if you go into any high-end spa or hotel, that's the number one brand that everybody wants to buy. There's like 2 or 3 other ones that are almost as good, but this is like selling like Apple products. If I was able to get an authorized dealership from Apple, I would have happily sold MacBooks. And AliExpress, or this dropshipping model that actually started in Bali, people were like, well, why spend so much energy selling reputable products? Why not just sell a bunch of cheap stuff from Alibaba?
Cutting boards.
Yeah, and no-name cutting boards that may or may not fall apart. And their whole model was sell them cheap enough where people wouldn't complain if they sucked. My products, they range anywhere from $300 to $3,000, and you can bet that if you bought something that's $500 or more, and if it doesn't ship quickly or it's bad quality, people can complain. But if you sell something that's $5 or even $35, which I think was kind of their cutoff, if it comes in 2 months and it's a piece of crap, people are like, oh well, it's not worth my time to chase down.
All right. So just to clarify for the audience, you're still working, you're still earning income, but it's only when you want and what you want to do. You don't feel like you need to work financially because you have to earn the money.
Yeah, you know, I gave a talk at a digital nomad conference about 2 years ago. That was kind of like my last talk. I did it just because my friends in the Nomad crews are throwing it, and a big part of it was drum up support for Ukraine. And my whole the topic was how I used my marketing skills to support Ukraine. Both fight Russian propaganda, but also to fundraise. And my talk was entitled "How I Used to Be a Millionaire." And before Russia's invasion, before I bought these properties in Ukraine, both the one I live in now, but also my rental property, and before I ended up just giving a lot of it away, I was a net worth millionaire, US dollar millionaire, and I thought that was going to be my ultimate goal. It would make me happier than anything in the world. And as soon as I reached that goal, I realized how little it mattered. And now I'm at a point where I'm actually happy that I'm not at that point. And I almost feel like if I ever start getting close to that point again, I'm just going to find a way to either spend or give away that money.
So let's go to your start in Ukraine. When was the first time you visited?
It was either 2016 or 2017. I for some reason I can't figure that out, but it was only
You did a lot of traveling, I understand.
Yeah, I've been to 50 plus countries, and it was only for a week. It was literally we did a me and a friend. We decided to travel Eastern Europe only by land. So our only rule was we couldn't take a plane. We had to take buses, trains, cars, and I remember even going to Warsaw, which was the furthest east I had ever been. I was thinking, and this is a bit embarrassing to say now, but I was thinking, are they going to have electricity? Do they have Wi-Fi? Do they have running water? And as soon as I got there, I realized, wow, Poland is a really nice country, and their infrastructure is better than the U.S. They had great trains, they had super fast Wi-Fi, everything kind of just worked. And when I got to Ukraine, to be honest, in that 2016, 2017, the infrastructure was pretty bad, but they had good internet. And then I decided, you know what? Next year, when my Schengen visa ran out, and for those who aren't familiar, as Americans, we can only stay in the Schengen zone, which is most of Europe, for 90 days every 6 months. And if it's up, you have to go somewhere else. And for me to prolong my travels during summer in Europe, I decided to go back to Ukraine. And every year that I came, I realized.
So when you say in Europe, you mean the EU?
Yeah, and the Schengen zone
So you're going to Ukraine to get around the visa requirements of the EU.
Basically, yeah.
Okay, I got that.
And the hard part is not every single country in the EU is part of the Schengen zone, but let's not get into that. In general, it's just the EU. So I would come to Ukraine not because it was my first choice, but because it was in Europe and it let me stay longer in kind of this Eurozone. But every year that I came, I realized I liked it more and more, and the infrastructure got better and better every year. I remember one summer being in Odessa and just craving fried chicken. And anywhere in the U.S., you can get fried chicken like that. Any gas station, any fast food chain, any delivery app. But in the entire city, there wasn't yet KFC. There was not a single place selling fried chicken. And the very next year, KFC magically opens. There's lines, down the block for a month. Then I thought, you know what? The only thing that Ukraine is missing is good coffee shops, like these hipster coffee shops where you can go with your laptop. I was working as a digital nomad at the time still, and I thought that's the only thing that Ukraine is missing are these like nice kind of cozy coffee shops with good internet. All they had was Aroma Kava, which is kind of like a Tim Hortons or like a bad version of Starbucks, like a Dunkin' Donuts. And the very next year, all these cool hipster coffee shops started opening, and I thought, wow, Like every year, Ukraine is getting better and better and better. And that's when I decided, I think I'm just going to move here.
So when did you start spending majority of your time, majority of your year living in Ukraine?
It was during COVID. I actually had got stuck in Sri Lanka for the first year of it.
Yeah.
And I
Was
didn't
that
want
a
to go
good
back to
place
the
to be
US.
stuck?
It's an amazing place for a few months. Uh, I had a really good life. But at the same time, it was like being trapped in an open air prison. It was
Everyone felt
probably,
trapped that year, by the way.
yeah, yeah. I compare it to like Martha Stewart when she was in prison. She probably had a great house, great food, but she couldn't really go anywhere. And that's how I felt in Sri Lanka. And that's when I realized, without being a resident of another country officially, if something like this ever happened or it extended, my only choice would be to stay exactly where I was and hope I didn't get kicked out, or to go back to the U.S. And I didn't really like, all the craziness that was happening in the U.S. At the time, and I didn't want to live in the U.S. anyways because the cost of living is so high. I didn't want to get stuck in my parents' house for the entire pandemic and be in one small space. And that's when I thought, you know what? I know that some countries offer these golden visas if you invest enough money or if you buy real estate. Let me look into that. And I looked into Turkey, I looked into Greece, I looked into Portugal, I looked into Thailand, and ultimately I decided on Ukraine, mostly because I really saw a bright future, and I really thought Ukraine was on this path of becoming, the next great capital of Europe.
So in 2020, because you were able to buy property in Ukraine, that allowed you to have some kind of semi-permanent visa to live there?
Something like that. It was a little bit more complicated than that, but yes.
So let's fast forward to February of 2022. Were you in Ukraine at the time of the full-scale invasion?
Yeah, I was sitting right here in this house. I live in the center of Kyiv, probably about 2 blocks away from the president's office. So he's just right up the hill behind me.
I've never heard this story. I've not seen a video if you've talked about this, but can you give me, what were your thoughts leading up to the invasion? Did you think it was going to happen? And then as soon as the bombs started going off in Kyiv, what did you think you had to do?
So it's really tricky because the warnings started happening 6 months before the actual invasion. And at the time, when you first heard the warnings, you panicked and you thought, okay, maybe I should get out of here for a little bit. Maybe I should pack a bag. Maybe I should go sleep in the bomb shelter for the night. And when when the invasion didn't happen, you thought, okay, maybe it's a false alarm. Everything's okay. And then the next month it happens again, and then again and again. And I remember December, 2021, like 3 months before the actual invasion. This is when the warnings were saying, we're 100% sure December 15th it's happening. And when it didn't happen, we thought, God, who do we believe? The problem was that every single time people believed that Russia was invading, the Ukrainian economy was getting damaged. People were either leaving the country. People either weren't weren't going to work. It was not good for Ukraine, and Russia was basically going to win, even if they never invaded. And I think that's why President Zelensky went on air saying, please stop spreading rumors that Russia's going to invade. We have no idea if they're going to invade. We don't think they're going to invade because it doesn't make any sense. Why would Russia invade us? We haven't done anything to them. We don't want them to invade. And all their reasons for possibly coming, including helping the Russian speakers, that's all made up. There's no actual problem. And if somebody in Donbass really, felt like they were being mistreated, they can just move to Russia. There was nothing stopping people, anyone from in Ukraine, especially in the border regions, from just hopping on a bus and just moving to Russia. And because I had met so many people from those regions, I had an apartment in Kharkiv, which is basically right on the border. I've been to, half of these areas. I knew that there was no actual legit reason for Russia to invade, and I had decided to dismiss it and thinking, you know what, nobody really knows if Russia's going to invade or not, and it doesn't actually make sense for Russia to do it, and I don't think they would get very far. So unless Putin is just insane, they're not going to invade.
There's a meme online. The Russians did it not because it's easy, but because they thought it would be easy. And I think it was Anders Puck Nielsen when I asked him, what's the number one reason why Russia invaded Ukraine? And Anders said, well, because Putin thought it would be a 3-day special military operation. The government would flee, the army would stand down, and it would have been easy for the Russians. But here we are over 600 days later.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing that could have made sense is if Putin genuinely thought that Ukrainians would start waving Russian flags saying, welcome, thank you for liberating us. But nobody wanted Russia to come, and nobody needed Russia to come. And that's why, as somebody who was living here, and speaking to Ukrainians, I knew that everything that we saw online, all the reasons why Russia, was saying they were going to invade was all BS. And I also knew that there was zero chance that they would come in and that the people of Ukraine would just give up and just, let Russia take over. I really, really wish that Putin had better intelligence because maybe he wouldn't have invaded in the first place.
Dictators don't like people who tell them things they don't want to hear.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, yeah.
So I think it was February 21st or 24th, the invasion officially started. Did you think to yourself, I got to figure out how to get out of here? Or were you always planning on just staying put?
So on the 24th, when I woke up that morning, I had about 70 text messages saying, it started, get out. And I decided to wait 24 hours. First, I wanted to figure out for myself if I would either be an asset staying, if I could somehow be helpful, or if I would be a liability. Secondly, I wanted to give everyone else that really wanted to leave a chance to get out first. And I thought, I'll give it a day. I'll let everybody, who feels
got
the
small
need.
Kids.
Yeah, like they can go first. I don't want to be, taking up space. So 24 hours later, I thought, okay, I either need to leave right now, or I'm gonna have to be okay with staying here for who knows how long. And I had been prepping, for the few months before, nothing serious, but when supplies were still open, I would bought extra water and food, so I knew I would be okay in my apartment. The problem is, first off, I have no military experience. Second, I don't really speak the language very well, and I only spoke Russian. And third, I think I would just be confusing if I walk. Even if I somehow got the hold of a weapon, if I walked around speaking really bad Russian, not being able to understand people, looking the way I do, I think people would just be confused, and either I would end up getting shot, or I would end up shooting the wrong side. And that's when I realized I need to get out of here because I'm just a liability. Like I'm of not only no help here, but I'm probably going to be a negative asset. So
did you end up temporarily leaving?
Yeah. So I went to Budapest and then to Poland. I was volunteering there. So I was helping like some of the refugee camps there. And I think it was at the end of April, I decided, you know what, I'm not able to do enough from this side. I'm going to go back. And originally, I was only going to go back to Lviv because it was safe. But as soon as I got back, I realized, you know what, I gotta show the world what's really happening. I'm in a very unique position where I had this big YouTube channel, that had over 200,000 subscribers, and I am one of the very few Americans, here that people in the West could put a face to, they can trust that, they can look through my videos for the last 10 years and be like, this guy's not a CIA agent. He's not he's not a Russian, or Ukrainian spy. He's just a normal guy. He's a travel vlogger,
You've been deep undercover for 10 years. The CIA has been planning this since 2008.
Yeah, that would be their best ops ever. But,
I always think it's hilarious when people accuse me of being a CIA asset, and I'm like, you can go on my channel and look at my videos from 2019. Like, I'm talking about, Chase credit cards and Roth IRAs. Like, do you really think the CIA would pick me? Like, of all of the possible people to start like a CIA propaganda channel, it would really be this guy. I'm flattered, but no.
Yeah. Well, I pivoted my channel from just showing, just travel to showing the atrocities that Russia has done. I went into, Irpin, Bucha, Hostomel, Cherniv, all those areas that were just very recently liberated. And it was very mind-blowing because I would be there filming a destroyed Russian tank next to a bombed out Ukrainian house. And while I was there, just going through rubble, I would see, some old lady also going through the rubble, and I would ask what she's doing, and she says, "This is my home. Like I'm here just to try to collect some things." And I thought, this is heartbreaking, putting someone's face to their house that is now completely destroyed. I was able to talk to everybody very candidly in my very broken Russian and, really poor language skills. Luckily, I would have some friends there that would help me translate sometimes. And I met so many people who, also just couldn't believe that Russia would come and destroy this, to destroy their homes. And from that point on, I realized, I have to do more. And that's when I started fundraising for Ukraine and volunteering and just highlighting all the efforts.
Can you describe, as an American, when you introduced yourself to Ukrainians as an American before the war, how did people react? How did people treat you? And was there a big shift, given America's support for Ukraine since the war began?
Yeah, actually, very. The funny thing is, the first few years that I came, people were shocked because they had never even met Americans, most of them, and the first question would be, "What are you doing here?" And not in a negative way, just in a very. They're just very shocked to see you, almost like a fish would ask, a camel, "What are you doing here in the middle of the ocean?" They just were not used to having Americans there. It's so far away, and Ukraine was so off the travel radar. Since then, they're used to meeting Americans all the time now. Whether they're journalists or volunteers or NGO workers or military, and overall, it's been very, very positive. Last night, my taxi driver, it's called Uklon, their local version of Uber. He said, "Oh, you're American." He's like, "Thank you, because without America, we wouldn't be here." And he goes on to talking about the Patriots, and he was just very grateful. And every once in a while, I get that. And it's really, really nice. Unfortunately, I think as the war goes on, and definitely after the war finishes, you're going to get a big influx of American tourists who are going to come, and not all of them are going to give Ukraine a good name. So right now, I think we're kind of at the peak of kind of a happiness when it comes to saying you're American.
I lived in South Korea for 6 years as an English teacher between 2009 and 2015. And when I first got there, they sent me to a city called Gwangju. It's in the southwest. It's about 1.5 million people. But I was the first native speaker in these schools I was placed in, and I was the first foreigner that a lot of people, in the southwest corner of the city had ever met in person. And I remember every one of those conversations just being like, I think it's more striking being a non-Asian in Gwangju meeting for the first time. But yeah, like you said, there's a lot of people who go to South Korea who don't give a good impression and don't represent themselves well. But at the same time, it's if you're importing people in their early or mid 20s, young people are just going to be stupid and do stupid things. So that's true for any group of people anywhere in the world. You get a bunch of 20-year-olds and give them money and cheap alcohol, and they're going to make mistakes.
Yep. So, yeah, I want to say that Ukraine, in those few years before the war, it was the best place in the world. It was like the best kept secret, where it was at this pivotal point where it was still very unexplored. So people were really genuinely happy to meet you as a foreigner. But the infrastructure was really, really good. Like probably the best internet in the entire world out of, definitely better than the US, better than, most countries I've ever been to. But they still had, great train systems, great metros, amazing. They started having really amazing restaurants. It was just like a peak time where, the prices were low. There was, no other tourists, but it was just a magical, magical time that, Russia's invasion completely ruined.
You're not the first person who's told me this, by the way.
Yeah.
Best kept secret, apparently.
Yeah.
Let's go back to last winter. Russia's master plan to end the war 11 months ago was to destroy Ukraine's energy infrastructure so that people don't have running water, they don't have hot water, and they don't have electricity. You chose to stay in Ukraine through the wintertime. Can you just talk about and describe what that was like?
Yeah, so it was a hard decision because it would have been much easier for me just to leave. I'm very fortunate that I have, a U.S. passport, and also I have, online income where there was nothing holding me back. A lot of Ukrainians, unfortunately, either couldn't leave for family reasons or for economic reasons, and they just, were forced to stay here and suffer. And I just felt like I needed to suffer with them. I wanted the solidarity and just to stay and just show my face and say, you guys you're not alone. While everyone else is leaving, there's at least some people, who are still going to stay and represent. So me having my YouTube channel, I wanted to be able to show what people were going through. I wanted to show the Russian strikes. I wanted to document living, in Ukrainian winter without electricity. And the funny thing is I had to cancel a lot of interviews because we didn't have internet or we didn't have electricity. So this wouldn't have been possible because a lot of people don't realize, but when the electricity goes out, not only does your Wi-Fi go out, but the cell phone towers also go out. So, all of a sudden we didn't have even 3G. And things got, improved throughout kind of at the end of winter when we started getting, better backups and better, and more generators and things like that. But the first couple of months, it was hard. And I remember sitting a lot, in the dark here in my apartment with just a candle or like a LED light.
What did you do to pass the time?
I thought I would be reading a lot or meditating or, doing something. But honestly, you end up just kind of doing nothing. You kind of end up just sitting there and just start, you think or you scroll on your phone with, 2G internet and you try to get a status update. It's
Were you getting 12 hours of sleep a day?
Yes, I slept a lot. That was the kind of the best way to pass the time. Whenever I did have internet, I would download a couple of YouTube episodes, so I could watch them offline. You know, um, I would sit here, edit videos. Luckily I have a M1 MacBook that has pretty good battery life, and I discovered all the cafes near my house. Luckily I live right in the city center, so there was always a few places that had generators or had internet. So I would spend a lot of time there. I remember doing one interview in the back of a shawarma shop. Just, there's nowhere else to go. It was a very interesting time. I'm glad I stayed. I'm glad I was able to show the world what Ukraine was going through. But I'm not going to do it again this year.
That was my next question. What are your plans? Because it's already November. Russia's master plan to end this war this winter, it's not going to work, but that's never stopped the Russians before. So what are your winter plans?
So I was originally hoping that it would actually be cold by now because I wanted, believe it or not, as a California boy, I actually never experienced winter. I lived in, I grew up in San Francisco, lived in Orange County, LA, and then moved to Thailand for 10 years. So I never experienced winter. And I kind of liked it. I kind of liked the snow, even though it was gloomy and dark. And I enjoyed that change of seasons. So I was actually looking forward to having 2 months of winter, being able to wear the new, knee-length parka that I bought for 70% off back in June. But December 9th, I am going to go to Thailand. I've decided I'm going to spend the winter there. I just can't put myself through it again. I'm burnt out. I've been in Ukraine since I got back in May. And if you guys remember, May was a really, really hard month where Russia was bombing Ukraine, I think almost every day, both at night and during the day. And I just can't go through that again. I'm just mentally, I'm a little bit checked out, to be honest.
As a Wisconsin boy who's experienced many winters, winter is nice through Christmas, even New Year's. But once you get to January, you're just like, nope, the charm has worn off. We can get over this, please. And sometimes, in Wisconsin or North Dakota, because I lived there for 4 years, winter doesn't end until May, and you're just kind of over it by February, March.
Yeah, and actually, my original plan was I really wanted to stay here for Christmas and New Year's, so I was looking at flights to leave January 4th or after, but tickets
flights from Poland.
Yeah, so that's the other problem with traveling. The reason why I don't fly very often is we can't fly from Ukraine, so I either have to fly from Poland or Hungary or
So
or
what
Moldova.
airport do you usually fly out of?
So I prefer to fly out of Krakow, but there's not that many international flights from there. So it would either have to be Warsaw or Budapest.
And how do you get there from Kyiv? How long is that trip?
It takes 2 days because it's literally like a 13-hour train to get to the border, a couple hours across, and then you're at the border, which takes another 4 or 5 hours to get to the major city. By then you're exhausted, so you want to spend the night somewhere, and then you fly the next day.
Wow.
Yeah.
I hope to visit Ukraine soon. With me to make all that traveling, I'm not making content. I'm not making update videos. I could vlog what I'm doing, but people prefer the factual updates as opposed to travel vlogs. But I will make the trip, I think, at some point in 2024. So it'll probably be when you get back to Ukraine. We'll have to meet up in person.
Yeah, well, I got a guest room here, so you're welcome to stay anytime.
So let's talk about NAFO 69th Sniffing Brigade. Can you just talk about, for people who don't know, what is that and what do they do and what have you been contributing to them?
Yeah, so I'm sure everyone's seen the NAFO memes, the Shiba Inu, North Atlantic Fellows Organization. It's basically online anonymous group, semi-anonymous group that supports Ukraine and fights against Russian propaganda. The 69th Sniffing Brigade is a chapter that was founded by Ragnar in Estonia, and he decided, you know what, I think the best way to support Ukraine directly is to get the military what they need, and what they really need are civilian trucks, SUVs and trucks, to do anything from scouting or to Kazivacs, or even to fight on the front lines. That's something that is very necessary, but they also get destroyed very quickly. A soft-skinned, SUV might only last 3 weeks on the front line. Luckily, some of them end up lasting a year. I've seen, some, that are still being used and still driving around. They're covered in dirt now. But I got involved actually when I met Andrew Mikado and Alex Kanash, and they invited me on Good Morning Kyiv, which is just like this little talk show that they did every morning while they're here. And they convinced me to start a fundraiser for a truck for the front lines. And before that, I've actually fundraised for 5 different vehicles. One was like a van for an orphanage. One was a Kazivac truck, actually for Brandon Mitchell, who's been on the show. A couple for the military, one for the EOD unit, the demining unit. So I've helped Ukraine get vehicles in the past, but this ended up being the coolest experience, because first, they have a really, really nice back end where people can donate basically direct to this fund. I don't have to touch any of the money and get hit with taxes or double processing fees. And then secondly, they reward the donors by shipping out these patches, which are really, really cool. They're made in the same places that the Ukrainian military patches are made. And they get together a convoy of 20 to 30 of these trucks, and they drive them from Estonia to Ukraine at the same time, and we do a big handoff to the military units who receive the trucks, and it ended up being a really, really cool experience.
So aside from anything NAFO related, I'm curious, in your opinion, what aid organizations on the ground in Ukraine do you think have had the biggest impact during this war?
This is a really, really hard answer to dive into, because there's some names that you see often, but you don't know. For example, you might see Red Cross once in a while, but you also know that billions of dollars was donated to Red Cross on behalf of Ukraine, and when you really dive down to it, only 1% of it went to the local Ukrainian Red Cross, and then the Ukrainian Red Cross, they do as much as they can with that, that 1% that they get. So even though you do see them, it just, you always have to wonder how much money that was donated is going to, another
You're
cause.
saying it's only 1% because the Red Cross does operations all over the world.
Exactly. So even though, I'm confident that the majority of the money that people donated in 2022, and especially in February, March, April, May, when it was a very hot topic, most of that money was donated because of Ukraine, and all their fundraising was directed to Ukraine. But what it does is it goes into a big pool, and not only does some of that money, or a lot of that money, get used for other expenses, but the money that even is directed to Ukraine, it just goes to the Ukrainian Red Cross, which I've met the people there, and they tell me, that they get 1% of. And actually, I double checked it. I was very curious, so I looked into the year-end funding, which is available on International Red Cross, and they break down how much goes to each place. and it was exactly 1%. So it was very, very disheartening knowing how much more they could have done with it. And the thing is, when the Ukrainian Red Cross gets the money, it's not like they themselves are going in and doing the work, either on the ground work. They're usually contracting to smaller organizations or local on the ground volunteers, anyways. So the best way that the money goes somewhere is if you can find small on the ground teams that are actually doing the work. That's what I was doing all last year. Just identifying individuals who are helping and just directly buying what they needed. The problem is that takes so much time and energy just to find these people, to vet them, to do small transactions here and there, that I couldn't do anymore just because it ended up being a full-time job. So it's a very, very difficult situation to explain. And this is why I like supporting organizations like NAFO, is because you can see, if I raised 16,000 euros, they received a truck with spare tires, night vision, and other things that's valued at 16,000 euros.
Are there any people, names, or organizations you want to shout out that I can link down below for people?
Yes. Right now, there's Mriya Children's Center in Odessa. I have a video with them a few weeks ago where they're basically a daycare and a job training center in Odessa for wives and families of soldiers who are on the front line. They can really use some help. All the different NAFO 69 campaigns that are actively going. And aside from that, I mean, it's hard to ask because it changes so often, and I don't want to single any one organization out, but I can say right now I'm working with Transformer Street Dog, which is a rescue center for animals. But at the same time, they are one out of literally hundreds in Ukraine. So I think it's a little bit unfair if they get all the funding and the other ones don't.
So let's actually transition and talk about what is the mood of Ukrainians that you interact with in the capital city of Kyiv? There's this debate happening in the United States right now, articles in The Economist and Time Magazine. President Zelensky was just on Meet the Press. Everyone in the United States is kind of going crazy that pays attention to this because Congress has to pass a budget by November 17th. Will Ukraine get funding for another year or 2 years or whatever? So, from your impression of people in Ukraine, how is the war going? What are their thoughts on it?
So this is always a very difficult question. I will say that it actually doesn't matter what people like me or civilians on the street think about how the war is going, or what should be done in the future, because the people who are actually serving on the front, they are 100% committed and they will not stop fighting no matter what. So if every single person in the West or every single person online, all the YouTubers started saying, yeah, this isn't going well, let's throw in the towel, give Putin whatever he wants, it's not going to change the fact that the people who are actually fighting, who actually are defending the country, are going to say no. We screw Russia, we're not going to let them take our land. And this is a very important point, because even if Western support dries up and the funding dries up, these people will still fight and defend their land. So the argument of the West is forcing these young Ukrainian men to fight and we're wasting their lives, that's all BS, because they would be there defending anyways. And by us not giving them what they need to properly defend themselves and take back Ukrainian land, that is what's causing the suffering and the deaths.
Well said. I just think it's incredible that people who have never been to Ukraine and don't know any Ukrainians are trying to say we need to save Ukrainians by sparing them from this war, as if denying them the equipment and weapons they need would stop them from defending their cities and their land and their people.
Yeah, I always, whenever I see it, I see it as an excuse on why they're supporting Russia, and just it's insulting that they're veiling it as they actually care about Ukrainians, because it's the opposite.
Yeah. Nothing is what it is as it seems. For members of Congress who every day say, "Well, I want to help Ukraine, but corruption, accountability, there's no oversight, all the money's being stolen." No, that's BS. Everything's accounted for. There's no proof of any kind of misuse of funds. The money doesn't even leave the United States. We give them physical things. We then spend the money in America to replace those things. So there's no duffel bags full of cash disappearing in Ukraine.
Yeah, the funny thing is, someone might then say, "Well, that's unfair that you're giving Ukraine expired ammunition or expired tanks, giving them old tanks, and then you're turning around and buying, brand new stuff." Well, first, it's good for the U.S. economy to replenish and create new state of the art goods to replace it, and secondly, Ukraine is happy to get the munitions that are almost expired because they're going to use it anyways.
As we learned from that helicopter field in Berdansk, ATACMS missiles made in 1996 still work perfectly fine, no complaints.
Yeah, I mean, I give the analogy of saying, you can, let's say there was a farmer that really needed a pickup truck because they had no vehicle, and you gave them your 1986 Bronco or
it still worked perfectly fine, by the way.
Yeah, maybe it needs a little maintenance, maybe it doesn't, it's not as shiny as it could be, maybe it doesn't have
Sirius XM.
Yeah, but this farmer is 100% happy because he has a truck now, and if you can somehow write that off and buy yourself a brand new Tacoma 2024, we're more than happy for you. It's literally a win-win for everyone involved, with the exception of maybe Russia.
I'm always impressed when I see these GoPro videos on the front lines of how well taken care of Ukrainian soldiers are, as far as their armor, their helmets, their boots, their uniforms, their patches. Like, these guys are really decked out. And they've got all the basics. And then you see the Russians, and they're wearing stolen sneakers, and they don't have body armor, and their helmets are airsoft knockoffs from China. And yeah, it's easier, I guess, maybe to get the little things than to get another Patriot air defense system, which costs $1 billion. But
yeah, I mean, to be honest, it was very tricky. Like the first year of the war, I remember a lot of the fundraising was, Vlad, my brother Vlad is going to the front line. He needs socks, he needs merino wool, he needs, gloves, just like kind of basics that you would think that would just be supplied. But the thing is, it took a long time for logistics to come, to have enough, good, kit for everyone. And then secondly, the logistical, what do you call it? Kind of transport, it was always hard, where there would always be some, units that would have, too many gloves, while another one had too many boots, or someone else has too many, XYZ. So in the beginning, it was, now thankfully I haven't even seen a single, local fundraiser for this, but this was a lot of stuff that we were giving money for in the first couple of months was, hey, my cousin, or my brother needs like boots and socks, could we buy it for him? Like, yeah, sure. Let's do that. I think the reason why Russians don't have that stuff is because first off, the people that were fighting, from Russia are from really, really poor regions, which I believe that Russia has kept them poor on purpose so they can not have a big say in anything in life. and they just couldn't afford to buy anything. And if they did, it got stolen, or just they got tricked, and they ordered stage 4 Kevlar. They ended up getting stage 1 Reynolds wrap or something. While Ukrainians really took care of themselves and took care of the people they were sending to the front. So even though a lot of it did come from local funding from friends and family, they tried to they really tried to deck them out as good as they could.
Yeah. So, Johnny, I know you've been watching my videos. You did a reaction, I guess, to one of my videos a couple weeks ago. But do you have any questions for me or anything you wanted to ask me about?
Yeah. I mean, this is a hard one for anyone to answer. But how do you see this war ending? What do you think are some possible, just endings to this?
So I've had to be careful what I say. I've slipped up a couple times because when I say this, it makes people really upset. But I did say in a video after Russia mobilized last September that I didn't think Ukraine was going to militarily win this war. And the reason why, Ukraine's still going to win the war. But most of the time when you win a war, it's because there's a political or an economic collapse of the country. Then the military just kind of pulls out and gives up because nobody's getting paid anymore, basically. That's what happened to the Russians in World War I. In World War I on the Eastern Front, there was an economic calamity which led to a political revolution. And the Russian military just said, we don't want to do this anymore. And they pulled out of the Eastern Front. The Germans took them all the way back to basically outside of Moscow. And as long as Russia still has currency reserves and they're making a decent price on their exports, they will find a way to buy what they need to keep their industrial base producing enough material. When you objectively look at what is the available pool of able-bodied Russian men that can be drafted into the military, there's 6 million guys left. And Putin's going to go all in. Putin doesn't care. He will take it. All 6 million dead, the entire treasury emptied, the entire country bankrupt, because he knows if he doesn't win this war, his people are going to kill him like Gaddafi. So I honestly think that at the highest levels in Western governments, they know this as well, that for Ukraine to try and go town by town, destroying all this material and killing all these Russian soldiers, Russia's just going to keep replenishing as long as the political base remains in power and their economy continues to function. So it's unfortunate that sanctions, that I do think that the West is doing their best with sanctions to try and destroy the Russian economy. But the Russian people have to, at some point, say, we don't want to do this anymore and put a stop to it. We're not there yet, but maybe at 500,000 dead, 600,000 dead, 800,000 dead, we will get there. We just learned in Dagestan last week that the Russians are capable of amassing a mob and destroying a local airport. If they can do it because they think Jews are landing from a flight in Tel Aviv, they can do it because they're dissatisfied with the war. So the lesson learned, tragically, is that not enough Russians have died, that their standard of living is still too good. They're still willing to tolerate Putin bankrupting their country and sending their sons to die for what? So this war might go on for a while, but the West has to stick with the game plan and Ukraine has to continue holding the line. But I honestly think the most likely scenario for this war to end is Putin dies, either naturally or somebody chokes him out, or there is such an economic calamity in Russia that everything breaks down. Like the secret police are no longer getting paid and they're not going to stop the mobs from rioting.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I'm definitely not a CIA agent, but there is one thing I am spying on, and it's the social media accounts of people who are living in Russia, in Moscow specifically. And I'm checking their stories every Saturday to see how good their life still is, because these are people that I was following before the war, And they would every weekend, like clockwork, go to a nightclub, pop bottles of champagne, be at a fancy dinner with beautiful girls, and just throwing money around. And unfortunately, I have not seen that change at all. But the day that the average wealthy person in Moscow starts suffering, where their life becomes very difficult, I think that's the day that the war is going to turn its tide. Because right now, the people in Russia just don't care. They don't care enough to stop the war, unfortunately.
I saw a post from Igor Sushko on Twitter showing this huge mob of people lined up outside, and apparently it was to get tickets to the ballet the Nutcracker was performing in Moscow. And Igor just said, I don't think sanctions are working. Like these
Yeah.
these people are forming these huge mobs trying to get tickets to a ballet show. So yeah, people in Moscow are still eating cake apparently. But
Yeah, and
it's changing. Like we need a global economic slowdown. I should be really careful what I say here, because why? I don't want to wish misfortune, but I've hinted this at videos in the past that the money supply is contracting here in the United States. This is the official monetary policy. Treasury yields are at 5% for a 10-year bond, and central bank interest rates are at 15-year highs. I just bought a house, and my mortgage rate is 7.25%. I can afford that, but I mean, what percentage of Americans can't afford that? So we're going to hold this until there's a breaking point here in the United States. And when the money supply contracts, it contracts really fast. And I've made this argument that Russia is the least prepared country in the world for a global economic slowdown.
Yeah, I'm definitely
It's
hoping
coming.
for that as well. Yeah. Congrats on the house, by the way. Definitely not on the high interest rate, but I'm also hoping for a slowdown. I think of it as not wishing for a major earthquake, but wishing for a minor kind of relief. That way there's not a bigger one in the future.
Well, the inflation rate in the United States is still 3.7%. The Fed says it has to be under 2%. The Fed doesn't care about the stock markets. The Fed doesn't care about the housing markets. The only two metrics, this is the Fed's mandate, is full employment and inflation under 2%. We have full employment in the United States. Everyone who wants to find a job can get a job. Like, it's scary. Like, I spent 2 or 3 years as a finance YouTuber watching all these channels, learning as much as I can, being on Investopedia. And it's frightening how little people understand how the economic order works globally, but also as an American in the United States. And I try to explain to people what I've learned, and people don't react to numbers. Like, people react to emotions. People react to special interest stories and, things that their neighbor said. I've had so many stupid conversations with people about, retirement accounts and the stock market, and I try to educate them, and they just refuse it. They hate numbers. They hate math. They want to believe that there's this global conspiracy to deprive them of whatever. I don't know. I can go on a tangent here.
Well, let's save that for a future episode. But yeah, it's been fun to actually talking to you in person, or not in person, but over video. I hope after this war, we can have a nice beer here in Kyiv to celebrate. Maybe check out your housewarming party one day too.
I will show up for the victory party in Kyiv for sure.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be a good one. I'll be live streaming that, so make sure you guys subscribe.
Do you have any final thoughts or final messages you want to share with the audience?
Yeah, I want to say that, thank you for everyone who's watching and supporting Ukraine because it's important. I know there's so many other things happening in the world right now, especially with Israel and Hamas, and the mainstream media has shifted their attention. But the fact that the fact of the matter is Russia still invading Ukraine, and Ukraine still needs our support. So, even if we're not supporting, the individuals or animal shelters anymore, if our personal situations change and we can't afford it, what we can do is, push to our decision makers that we want to and we need to continue supporting Ukraine militarily, because I didn't want to believe it, but military really matters. And when you have a dictator like Putin, nothing could stop him, besides, making sure that militarily he's not able to continue. So thank you guys so much. Дякую, Slava Ukraine, and thank you so much, Jake.
Glory to Ukraine, glory to the heroes. Thank you for watching, everyone. Johnny, thank you so much for your time. Until we meet again.
All right. Cheers.